Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. This will be the wildest week of the NFL season. If you thought Antonio Brown going to the Raiders was something over the weekend, or Joe Flacco getting dealt off to Denver, who's going to wind up where? I even saw Kelechi Osemele was headed to the New York Jets. Luke, it's our favorite time of the year. It's the tampering period, not the pre-tampering period or the post-tampering period. We're into tampering right now in an effort to get to the other side of the week. Going to be a very, very busy week in the NFL, huh?
Yeah, and it's always funny, especially as this, quote, legal tampering period was introduced several years back. We've always kind of viewed Wednesday at 4 p.m., when the official signing period begins as the start of free agency, when we've seen more and more unofficial, official deals reported, starting as soon as the tampering period begins. So it's definitely interesting in that regard. But you mentioned it with Antonio Brown, and I just look at this entire division right now specifically. I mean, there's so much intrigue about the Ravens with what the Lamar Jackson era looks like as he's entering his first full year as a starter, and what the Ravens are going to do there. Pittsburgh has jettisoned the best wide receiver in the NFL over the last 5 or 6 years for a third or fifth round pick from Oakland,
and they save cap space moving forward as well. So,
no,
not a lot. They got crushed on the first one. But what I'm saying is they don't have a $21 million receiver anymore.
Right. I mean, they have that kind of a cap hit, but they don't have that kind of receiver. So you have that, and then you have the Cleveland Browns, who played much better down the stretch last year, and they have a boatload of cap space. So, really,
and they might sign C.J. Mosley for all we know, right?
Right. I mean, they're a player for just about any free agent that's out there. So I think, the Bengals are the one team you look to in this division that don't really seem all that interesting right now, although they have a new coach, new coaching staff. First time in forever that they have a new head coach.
Yeah, we'll see if they got a coach who's better than Marvin. We'll find that out.
Well, I think they just need players. And the Bengals, they have not as much cap space as the Browns, but they have some significant cap space. So this is such an interesting week. It always is, but specifically for the AFC North, with this, what feels like a real shift, and it was a shift last year. The Ravens beat the Steelers out for the division, but it just really feels like this week could be so pivotal in so many ways for all of these teams that I can't wait to see how it's all going to play out.
Well, the first thing was Antonio Brown, right? To say, well, who would want that piece, right? Not all that different a piece than Joe Flacco. Not everybody wants a $20 million wide receiver, and certainly not many of them want a cranky one. You would think you'd need to be on the cusp of winning. The Raiders are the weirdest franchise in sports, right? To give away Khalil Mack and then to sign a wide receiver who is in the prime or headed toward the other end of the prime, or maybe a different kind of receiver in your offense. They're not even sure who their quarterback is. There were rumors last week they're going to trade up for Kyler Murray, right?
Right. It's the Raiders.
It's like Al's still alive. It's like
it's so funny you said that, because I was just going to say Al Davis has been gone now for almost 8 years, but it still feels like he's there, right?
Who's the fastest guy in the draft? Let's draft him.
Exactly. And you mentioned what's interesting about Antonio Brown. And look, everyone here in Baltimore has kind of followed from afar disruptions and him not getting along with Roethlisberger, and Roethlisberger calling out teammates, and Mike Tomlin, whether he has control of the locker room or not. And we haven't even mentioned Le'Veon Bell yet and how that played out. But
here's the guy who quit on them and refused to show up for work the last week of the year. It's really sort of an unconscionable sin, right? For your teammates to say, you didn't try for us? What? And you were being paid? What?
Yeah, but at the same time, when he was there, and over these last 5 or 6 years, you talk to a man in that locker room, and I saw reports over the weekend, even in the aftermath, NFL Network was talking about how they'd reached out to Steelers teammates, and they all said his work ethic, that Week 17 notwithstanding that whole fiasco, but they said his work ethic was second to none, and no one works harder than him. And what's interesting about this, though, is everyone talks about the money, the new money that the Raiders are going to give him, the cap space that the Steelers are just eating in 2019 not to have him on the roster.
Well, he was that big of a dick that they had to get rid of him. You know what I mean? Like, there aren't many cases in the modern era where you're such a jerk that they have to get rid of you. You know, like, we can count on them, right? I mean, we can go through the NFL and talk about Terrell Owens and, you know, a handful of other malcontents, but this really is sort of an unprecedented story with these knuckleheads in Pittsburgh last year. Le'Veon Bell not making any money in the prime of his career, turning down $14 million that he'll never get back. And now Antonio Brown actually got a raise out of this deal, right? Like, so it turned out to be sort of this incredible leverage point for him. He got what he wanted and then some, right?
I was just going to say, I mean, you can say all you want about how he acted, and look, I'm not going to sit here and say that things that he has done really over the last few years have set well with me, but it's incredible to look at what the Steelers were willing to do to get rid of him. A $21 million cap charge for a player who's no longer on the roster. And not just any player. This isn't Ray Rice. This isn't a case where they had to cut a player because of a domestic violence incident or some other disturbing
This
crime.
guy was such a jerk, they had to trade him. Like, literally, that's what it comes down to.
They felt that way, sure. But you're still talking about the best wide receiver in the NFL over the last 6 years.
Same stories we're talking about with Terrell Owens, right? When Billick was convincing me that the Ravens were going to absorb him, right? The Raiders are going to absorb him with all 3 of their wins this year.
Yeah, well, but I'll say it worked in Philly for, about a year and a half. It worked really well that first year for them. So I'm guessing you and I, probably with not as much interest, but 12 months from now, 18 months from now, 2 years from now, we'll be talking about Antonio Brown being really unhappy in Oakland because it's probably not going to go all that well out there because of what you said. They're not sure what's going to happen with Carr and who their quarterback's going to be, maybe not this year, but at some point in the next year or two. And oh yeah, Antonio Brown's going to be a 31-year-old wide receiver. If you actually look at the recent history of the NFL, receiver is one of those positions that's becoming a younger man's game as well. I mean, there aren't as many. For every Larry Fitzgerald who just, defies logic, you're seeing other wide receivers hit the other side of 30, and they're not falling off a cliff, but there's a pretty substantial decline. So I think he's going to defy that at least for a while because I think he is that special of a talent, but it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, and it is incredible to think how he acted. The fact that we were talking, that first playoff week, we were talking so much about everything coming out with Pittsburgh and Antonio Brown just quitting on them. He went to social media. He threw Tomlin under the bus, threw Ben Roethlisberger under the bus, and look, there was truth to certain things he was saying. Yes, I mean, I don't think this was all about him. I think there's been a lot of dysfunction in Pittsburgh that they were able to overcome to some degree, but it is incredible to think how he went about doing this and how he ends up getting new money, ends up in a place that, look, I think he's going to be in for a rude awakening in some ways, in understanding that he probably had it way better than he thinks in his mind in Pittsburgh the last couple years, but he winds up in a situation where he gets new money, he gets his way, and we will see how it plays out. And I'm very fascinated as far as his whole mindset, and there was so much talk last year with John Gruden with coming into that locker room, coming back to the Raiders after such a long layoff as an NFL head coach, but I'm really intrigued to see how that's going to mesh, him and Antonio Brown trying to get along in a situation where, let's face it, Antonio Brown, to your point, used leverage to go
be a loser, to go somewhere where he will guarantee that he will lose the next couple of years.
Yeah, most likely, sure. Although I'll say the Raiders have.
You don't like catching 100 balls from Ben Roethlisberger. Go catch 80 and watch 20 hit the ground out in Oakland, and watch you never get the ball because your quarterback's going to be on his back half the time. Yeah,
but I'll also say this: the Raiders can go out and sign Le'Veon Bell too. If they sign him, and they have Antonio Brown, I mean that offense becomes far more interesting, right? I mean,
sure.
It can't be that bad when you have those two guys. So, look, does that mean they become a playoff team? I'm not convinced of that because they have a lot of work to do on the other side of the ball as well, and they just traded away Colecchio Simile as well. So, but it's definitely an interesting team, and I am very skeptical how it's going to work out for Brown in Oakland. I think he'll put up good numbers. I don't know if he's going to put up the numbers that he's put up in Pittsburgh. And I keep coming back to what Larry Fitzgerald said, about a week ago, I think it was. And he wasn't even trying to be all that disparaging to Antonio Brown. He even said that he considers him a friend around the league. But he said, I'm not sure that he really understands how good he had it. And if anyone can speak on that, it's Larry Fitzgerald.
Who would have loved to have been born into a Pittsburgh Steelers jersey.
Yeah, I mean, he had a window with Kurt Warner for a few years there, and Carson Palmer had a couple really good seasons with the Cardinals, but he played with a lot of journeymen and has-beens and never will be type of quarterbacks that I can totally see him looking at Antonio Brown and saying, boy, man, the grass is not always greener on the other side, and yeah, you're going to get your money, but I'm not so sure you're going to be as happy as you think you are to finally escape Pittsburgh.
Here's Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. If you're not on the WNST text service, this might be the week you want to be on it. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be back in the cockpit on Thursday. He did do Friday last week, so if you heard the switch and afternoon drive on Thursday and Friday, it was a 1 week only. But we're going to have more signings, and C.J. Mosley's going somewhere. Eric Weddle's off to the Rams. There'll be more stuff happening all week long, as well as Yusnal Diaz being sent down to minor league camp. All of that happens on the WNST text service, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Shout it out for LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute up in Owings Mills, Dr. Kevin Crutchfield and Dr. Craig Bennett. This is Crutch's week to join us here this week, so we'll do concussion this week. We had Dr. Craig Bennett on last week talking about arthritis and careers and Todd Gurley and all that good stuff. Our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute, they are the new game plan for all of your sports-related injuries, backed by the local surgeons and the doctors who treat the pro athletes. Cal Ripken looks great on those billboards. He sounds great on WNST, but it's even better when you use the facilities they have at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. My wife's actually headed up there a little later on. My wife's trying to get ready to do a half marathon, working with the folks at Parisi, the folks at LifeBridge. We appreciate that. Strategic Factory does marketing, printing, promotional goods of all kinds, all in one shop up in Owings Mills. I don't tell anyone, but I'm almost at a business card, so I got to get Strategic Factory. They do business cards, they do hats, they do shirts, they do cups, they do everything. StrategicFactory.com. They give you the strategy to make your marketing better if you're a company that puts logos on stuff, and I'm about to put a Baltimore Positive logo on some Strategic Factory wear. Find them out at strategicfactory.com. Last but never least, the Modell Lyric. Check out the website. That's the best way to know everything that's going on at the Modell Lyric. But I will warn you, Joe Bonamassa coming up here this week, the Doobie Brothers in 2 weeks. We have Tom Johnston in the buyatoyota.com audio vault as well. Britt Floyd May 2nd. Frank Zappa hologram show on May 3rd. Bill Maher on June 9 and JoJo Siwa on June the 12th. There is always magic at the Modell Lyric, my favorite theater in town. Luke Jones joining us here. He will be out and about all week long as we get ready for, let's see here, Orioles opening day, a couple of weeks away now. I'm heading to the NFL owners meetings next week, but certainly, and the Terps as well, playing Big Ten this week. But the NFL thing this week has already started, right? I mean, Joe Flacco is going to have a press conference in Denver, and I owe him a Dear Joe Flacco letter. Eric Weddle now going to have a press conference out in Los Angeles as a member of the Rams, and I know you love that photo he shared on Twitter of him as an 11-year-old boy wearing Rams gear. But this will be a week where you're going to need a scorecard, I think, around the league where there's a lot of money, a lot of floating bodies. I mean, even the Ravens have allowed C.J. Mosley to go out and shop, right?